Namaskar, viewers. Welcome to Sathology, this show with a very famous guest. He's joining us from Singapore, and today we have a topic of interest to many of you viewers. And we sent you a note yesterday night who is speaking and what is the topic. Economic models define economic prosperity, all of us know that. And like in finance, it works on models. So the broader economy also has a philosophy as well as a model. So we have different economic models in different political landscapes. So communism, capitalism, and dharmikism. And actually, read my last article, Dharmic Americanism. That's a new political ideology I wrote on that what is going to be the future of America in terms of how we live and what we live. So let us welcome without fail Sri Anurag Saxena from Singapore.
Namaskar, Satsangi ji.
Namaskar.
Pleasure to be here as always.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining. So you wrote an article in Swarajya Mag, and this topic I have been thinking about it for a long time. But you wrote on your own, so I thought yes, we should go for it. So what do you think is the main difference between these three models, where we Arthashastra, communism, and capitalism?
Well, you see, let's get to the whole idea of Arthashastra or any Indic or Dharmic model of economics in a bit. Let's first discuss the two preeminent models that exist as of today, or that have existed as very recently. There's capitalism and there's communism. Now, if you look at communism, the whole history tells us that communism has failed, taking down with it various nations that adopted to it. Till a few years back, people used to say, look, communism didn't fail. USSR failed because it was a conglomeration of very unlike people, unlike states, etc., etc. But now you look at Venezuela, there's a whole bunch of models there that communism per se has failed to deliver GDP or national output benefits, failed to deliver prosperity, healthcare, education, etc. for the people, failed to deliver strength that a nation needs from a security point of view or from a military point of view. Most importantly, it has failed to deliver in terms of building consensus in a democratic manner. So communism is dead. Let's look at capitalism. Now, capitalism is dead using an American context. Capitalism is dead for the 99% that are not benefiting from it. Now, if you're in the top 1%, the whole Wall Street types, the businessman types, the country club types, then capitalism obviously works for you. However, if you are in the 99%, right, if you're the silent majority, you have to hold two jobs today just to pay for your healthcare and rent and car EMI and this and that. You don't know, you have no security in terms of the job, in terms of your job. It's a very highly stressed environment that most people work in. So a very, a greed-based model like capitalism works because it creates a lot of huge winners, but it also creates a much bigger set of losers that at a collective level are losing far more than a few winners are winning. So, my hypothesis is pure communism is dead. Pure capitalism is in the process of dying or becoming irrelevant. If you look at, let's say, the whole Black Lives Matter, right? The whole issue of Black lives, the whole issue of race, caste, elitism, relative prosperity, etc., is rooted in the idea of capitalism. That I am better than you, I am more prosperous than you, I will garner an inordinate percentage of the Earth's resources, and therefore I will rule over. So in my view, capitalism is not just an economic issue, it is also a social issue. So what I propose instead is the whole idea of dharmikism, which is, you live in the Silicon Valley. People talk about conscious capitalism, capitalism with a heart, etc., etc. And I just tell them that, look, that model already exists. Way before India was colonized. That's precisely the model that India was used to, which is to say that, look, create wealth. There is no downside. There is no issue with creating wealth. Go out, create as much wealth as you can, become rich, but create it with a trusty mindset. Create it with a mindset of putting it to use for you, your family, your community, your society, your nation. It sounds very theoretical, but with I'm more than happy to get into details of it. But I think it's time now for the world to accept that these two models have changed, and a more humane third model needs to be presented. And I'm calling it dharmikism till somebody comes up with a better.
No, that's a great point you make in the start. And I think there is a need for a middle model, and that's all of us are searching for. In the USA, the GOP came from classical liberalism. That's a philosophy they came from. And Democrats, they came from social liberalism. Now, social liberalism has resulted in political correctness, and you see a large demographic change coming in the Europe in a big way, and for the detriment of the entire Europe. Europe as you knew it 10 years back no longer exists now. It's a very insecure place. Now, if you look at the USA, the classical liberalism has so far succeeded in keeping American entity intact. But in USA also you have the same elements which are troubling Europe, which is in the form of I call them democrats. They're also here. And so the third way has to be a way which is neither of these two. And communism and the liberalism, the fight of the classes, what they call it, communism, and which is again a French model, which was taken over by the Marxists and then became Marxism. So all these models have apparently failed in one way or the other because of the various social pressures. But the dharmikism which you are referring to, or we call it based on Arthashastra, it is the real balanced model, as per my view. So my question to you is that most of these economic models, they come from governance, come from the top. So how do you think which philosophy at the top is going to be entertaining such kind of model?
Before I get to that question, can I quickly, you mentioned Marxism, so that happens to be my favorite topic. If you don't mind, can I spend a minute talking about Marxism?
Please.
Now, here is the reality of Karl Marx. Unfortunately, people haven't read his own history and his own writings, right? Karl Marx never visited a mill or a factory in his life, right? He was an intellectual, let's say, but he was an intellectual whose theories were not rooted in any kind of reality, right? He was somebody who himself was not productive and lived off the largesse of much richer friends of his, who he, for whatever reason, supported him, right? Let's look at the personal character of Karl Marx, who today it is shocking to me that feminists consider, or women consider, Karl Marx their role model. Karl Marx, having fought for human rights or worker rights, actually kept a slave. With that slave, he had an illegitimate child called Fred Dumoth, right? That illegitimate child did not know that Karl Marx is his father. Now, imagine a guy like Karl Marx who talks about equal pay, equal wages, actually having somebody that he doesn't pay money to. And not just does he get her to do jhadu pocha, he actually exploits her sexually, right? That's the kind of man we are talking about. I mean, Karl Marx had 6 children, right? 3 of them died primarily because he refused to get them healthcare and said it was the state's job to provide them hospitalization when they fell sick. He had daughter, he said very famously that girls should not go out and work, and they should know how to, cook and clean and do embroidery and crochet and pata nahi kya kya. And I'm shocked that women today consider him a role model. Yes, it's very interesting. Normally they say that every mother finds their children attractive. However ugly the child is, the mother says, "Ki yaar, mera bachcha bada pyara hai." When Karl Marx's mother was asked about Karl Marx, she said, Karl Marx's book was called Das Kapital, Capital. She said, "I wish instead of talking about capital, Karl would produce it." Right? That's his mother giving a press statement or a public statement. So we need to understand the deep hypocrisy that Karl Marx is. And anybody or any ideology or any stuff that comes from such a broken personal value system cannot be ideal in my mind, right? It caught on because of its bohemian values, because of what it professes theoretically. When you're young, when you're idealistic, when you're gung ho, when life hasn't hit you, you tend to be very very wannabe or aspirational about how you want the world to look rather than how it actually is. So I can see the attraction in campuses when they're attracted to Marxism, but we should never forget that Marxism comes from a person whose personal value system was so broken, who had slaves, who had illegitimate children, who didn't let his daughters work, which would be very unacceptable by any standards. But coming back to your question, Aditya ji, yes, so you were talking about, shouldn't a model like this come top down? Absolutely, you're right there. Let's look at 3-4 mega factors globally, right? Brexit has happened and UK's financial position is now being questioned, even internally within the US. Within the UK. If you look at USA's exports as a part of the global economy, it has dwindled over the last 18 years. If you look at China, there is a huge backlash against China right now, not just because of the coronavirus, but because of a lot of questionable practices around digital security, copyright, intellectual property, etc., etc. So I believe there is a very unique opportunity that India has to present its own model to the world. Now, why should India present its model to the world, right? Now, and this I closely link to the whole idea of Vishwaguru, which we talk about all the time. We've exported yoga, we've exported Bollywood and turmeric lattes and all those kind of nice things, but all of this has a very limited percolability. They have a very limited amount to which they will get adapted. Right? Now let's talk about India's opportunity in the light of Brexit, the anti-China sentiment, the US economic might falling, EU disintegrating, etc., etc. Right? Now, why is the USA cool today? USA is cool because they exported their idea of coolness through Hollywood and Starbucks and whatever. Why is the UK successful today? Because they exported the idea of governance. Why is Germany successful today? Because they exported the idea of manufacturing, efficiency, etc., etc. So if you see over the last few centuries, if you look at countries that have become superpowers, they have become superpowers only when they have been able to export an idea that gets adopted by other countries in the world. Now, given that India is getting more assertive, India is getting more successful, India, or rather Indians, have an opportunity to export our idea. Now, what is our idea? Of course, there is peace and there is harmony and brotherhood and the old traditional Gandhian principles. But there are ideas which are more ready for adaptation. For example, our version of an economic model. You could call it dharmikism, you could call it whatever. But I think it's time for us to get ambitious and export our own economic model. One that is rooted in ancient wisdom, it's been tested over time, etc., etc. Look, I'm not saying we should blindly follow archaic wisdom or dated wisdom. I'm not at all saying that all. I'm not even saying that this model is perfect or that there won't be chinks or there won't be hurdles. All those challenges are going to happen. But unless, in the context that, in the long history of time, 30, 40, 50 years is not much. Within less than a century, we will have seen communism breaking down and capitalism breaking down. There is such a vacuum there for a new economic model. If India were to just capture that, it would just put India in a totally different trajectory altogether.
You're right, actually. The US has, since World War II, exported democracy as a political
Absolutely.
ideology, and the Soviets used communism as an export of political ideology, and along with them came economic models. So one of the articles I wrote 6 months back was, if US exports democracy, why not India exports dharma? Because dharma is also a political ideology, in which exactly you are saying. And a couple of weeks back, Ram Madhav had come to our program, to Satology show, and he said dharmocracy. He said dharmocracy should be exported. This is a new coin. He coined a new term. See, the political, I don't know how to put it, but independent economic models haven't survived for a very long time. And so that's why I was saying it has to be tied with the ideology which India exports. And if India were to export dharma, then Pakistan will not exist, nor Afghanistan, nor Bangladesh, or any other community or country. Anyway, we have concern with dharma here. So in this model that you're saying, which you are saying dharmikism or anything, the new political ideology that we want to follow in the US is dharmic Americanism. We want to retain American innovation, exceptionalism, which is prevalent in the society here, but we just want to add dharma to it, which makes it more logical, reasonable for rest of the people, all the people combined. Doesn't matter who it is. Now, in your model dharmikism, what are the key things that you're thinking which can be different from communism or capitalism, or it is a path in the middle somewhere?
Well, you see, it's very interesting you brought this up. What makes America great is the innovation culture. Not just innovation in product or in machinery or in software, but innovation in business models itself.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
While America might curb monopolistic practices or fair trade practices, as you call it, America itself has been able to establish its brands as monopolies across the world. Right? Now, in the model that I'm recommending, when it comes to intellectual property rights, when it comes to copyright, when it comes to incentives, when it comes to wealth creations, when it comes to profits, when it comes to markets, it's exactly the same as capitalism. Right? So what we are saying is you should encourage people to reap the benefits of their labor. So there's no difference there. That is how human beings are motivated. Unless there are incentives, I will not get up in the morning from my bed unless it helps me in some way, right? So from an incentives, from an innovation, from a wealth creation point of view, there is no difference. However, the focus of that wealth creation in dharmikism has a very trusteeship focus, right? Where we are saying that we want to move away from a culture of consumption and thoughtless consumption. I'm not the first person to speak about it. A lot of American academicians, American sociologists have been talking about thoughtless consumption. You walk into a Costco, you buy a $5. I hate to call it a tub of ice cream. It's literally a bucket of ice cream. You eat half of it, you get bored with the flavor, you chuck it, and you bring the next one. Right? You look at fast fashion. Right? You buy a $5 shirt or a $10 shirt. You're bored of it 3 months down the line. You chuck it. Why? Because the season has changed, right? And so on and so forth. So what we are saying is we need to follow the idea of moving. We need to move from a culture of consumption to a culture of preservation. Now, preservation of what? Preservation of the ecology, preservation of social structures, preservation of preservations of any resource that can be depleted or any resource that you don't own, because at the end of the day, what is the whole idea of ownership really? Think about it, right? A Warren Buffett, a Bill Gates, and the whole coalition they form now are coming around to the fact that, hey, we're not really owners, we're only trustees. We're going to give away 99% of our wealth because it wasn't ours to begin. So I think what's happening is for the super rich, for the ultra high net worth, who've achieved a status where they're really looking for meaning, they have understood that they are only trustees. They're not really owners per se, right? The other big difference between, let's say, capitalism and dharmakism is capitalism is very rights focused. It's about individual rights. Dharmakism has to be about individual responsibility. So if you look at ancient Indic wisdom, right, whether it is Arthashastra or whatever else, there is more that is discussed about responsibilities of an individual, of an officer, of what you would call, let's say, a minister today, and of a king or a president or a prime minister. Right? There's more discussed about responsibilities right from an individual to a head of state than about the rights of those individuals. So we have to make that shift today from saying, and we see the downside of this rights-based mentality creeping into society as well. It's a very it's very easy to shift from rights to entitlement. Right?
Exactly.
It's a very natural progression if you're saying, oh, I deserve this, I have the right to that, and the other, so ye mera hak hai, ye mera hak hai, I deserve this, I deserve this, I deserve this, this is my right, that is my right, that is my right. It's always about me, and you don't even realize when you're turning into being entitled, right? So what we are saying is, look, it's fine. Most countries accord people a certain set of rights constitutionally and socially. Alongside that, there has to be a set of responsibilities. As one of my friends says it very nicely, what gives you the right to have a right? And it's a very deep question. You had nothing to do with being born. That was effort your mother took. What have you done so you have the right to a right? And I think increasingly, as we see campuses being set on fire, as we see the curbing of free speech because it hurts somebody's sentiments, as we see people being sued for not calling a him, or rather for calling a him and a her. Once you have the antiphization of rights, it can only lead to, the US is a great example of how it's leading to physical violence, to breaking of a social order, etc., etc. So I think we increasingly, not just within the economic model point of view, we increasingly have to talk, we have to reinforce the idea of responsibility along with the idea of rights. Otherwise, we'll never achieve balance.
You said it very correctly, the rights versus entitlements. And I don't know why we have read our minds, we're thinking the same way. And 3 months back, I wrote an article on that also, exactly the same title, rights versus entitlement. There are finite number of rights, because there are 350 million Americans, so we have finite number of rights. So if somebody claims more rights than the others, then somebody else loses, because rights ultimately boil down to dollars also. So everyone wants to, like, whenever we have refugees coming from Middle Eastern states, and so they always come as refugees, and refugees means they live on welfare. And slowly we had a protest in Boston over the entitlement they naturally created for themselves, that they have to be given money from the state. And the state says, okay, hello, when you come to this country, first 3 months free. After that, you're on your own. And then the politicians put in, the Democrats come in, CARE comes in, all kinds of organizations come in and say, no, they deserve it. Now what happens is, now that money is coming from American taxpayer. American taxpayer has a right to question, why should I give you taxes? The tax submissions go down by 20%. Now IRS is worried now why Americans are not paying taxes. they're saying we don't approve of where you spend. Now, then the law comes in, and the people who are saner voices get subdued. So you're absolutely right that we need a karma focused society. Everyone has a karma, kartavya, and their karya. Yes, go ahead. You're
You
saying.
know, also on this whole idea of illegal immigration and people landing up on shores on a boat, I am absolutely empathetic to people that might be persecuted, for people that, it's for some people, they face a terrible situation back home. There is unimaginable level of persecution and violence, and they all try and look for a safer place to be. And there's no denying that there is a percentage of immigrants that are that. There is also another set of immigrants, and the US, the UK, EU has released a lot of data on this. There are also a lot of people who are calling themselves refugees just to move into, just to shift the economics of their own personal life, just to move from a country that is not prosperous to a country that is already prosperous. And I think that's dangerous, because what happens is, the real victim of an illegal immigrant is not an American citizen. The real victim of an illegal immigrant is a legal immigrant that is putting in the effort, the paperwork, the time, the bandwidth to go through a process which makes him American enough to be absorbed into the US. And I think, so when we talk about illegal immigrants, the conversation should not be about an illegal immigrant versus a citizen. It's a conversation between an illegal immigrant and a legal immigrant, right? And it's surprising that a lot of your senators and congressmen whose parents were legal immigrants, right? You had a president whose father was a legal immigrant. You have politicians whose parents came in legally, who are now okay with others like their parents being disadvantaged just because somebody else wants to come. And that is, that's a little sad. There should be minimal tolerance for people who are trying to break the system, cut the queue, take away what is somebody else's. It's not a model that is sustainable.
No, you're right. That's why I said the rights and entitlements and dollars, these are all finite quantities. So you take something, then somebody else loses out. And whereas what you're suggesting, dharmikism, is a better option because it's infinite, because everyone is dependent
Absolutely.
on their own rights. So nobody is taking on or duties. Nobody is assuming anybody else's duties. So it's a infinite concept.
Absolutely.
So economically, it makes more sense because people are worried about their own kartavya and duties. And the advantage is that the country becomes more productive. Now, one just last question, or after that, I'll give you an open forum. And this is a question from the people now, students who are watching. In your model that you're suggesting, what is the uh, what are the chances that human rights won't be exploited?
Oh, that's a very, very interesting question. And so this happens to be my favorite. This happens to be my favorite topic of discussion as well. Let's look at communism, capitalism, dharmikism. Let's look at each of them and the potential that each of them has to exploit human life or human rights. Communism, I don't even need to make a case for a model that has taken millions of lives, right? The Gulag, and there are lots of examples of communism having forced models where they've spread mayhem, destruction, blah blah blah. You walk into if you walked into cities and factory townships of USSR in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you would see what I'm speaking about. There are survivors who are escaping China today that are telling their story out, what kind of inhumane conditions are forced to work on, etc., etc. So communism, we know nothing can get as bad as communism. So let's leave that out. Let's look at capitalism. more than, so it's some very interesting data from Pew and from the national, what do you guys call it, National Bureau of Statistics or whatever in the US. I think some 58% of African Americans and Latinos do not get through grade 10. A huge segment of this segment, is on welfare or is on dole. Many of them because they come from single parent families. The probability of incarceration is far higher, primarily because there is no economic respite, or you don't see a gateway for yourself economically to move through the glass ceiling, so to speak, that exists. So we know communism has failed for everybody. We know that capitalism is failing for a majority of the people. If you have to think 5 times before you take your family out for a dinner at Olive Garden, then the model isn't working. Period. Now, let's look at the whole idea of dharmikism. For those who have read my article, or if you Google for it, it will literally be the first link that you will find. Now, as I said, dharmikism is premised on a model of trusteeship. What is trusteeship? Trusteeship is the whole idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is to say that the whole world is my family. Right? It is premised on the idea that I cannot have my stomach full as much as I eat. I cannot have my stomach full if anybody else out in society is hungry. Because I know that hunger has not been solved. My hunger has been solved. From a rights point of view, my hunger has gotten solved. But hunger exists because somebody is hungry in society. So if I take a responsibility point of view, that dharmikism tells me, it becomes my responsibility to feed the last person on street, which our dharmashalas, which are langars, which are, the akshapatras and annamritas do it. They adopt the same principle of dharmikism and repurpose it to today's context. When you move from a capitalist culture of consumption to a dharmic culture of preservation, what happens therefore is the unnecessary materialism that you were consuming, that extra ice cream, that shirt that you barely wear, that car that you never drive, the shoes that you really don't need, those extra pair of sunglasses that you bought just for the heck of it. When you stop being greedy, when you stop being greedy about your consumption, all of that product is left for somebody else to consume, right? So therefore the living standard of that other person increases. Now, structures for human rights violations, etc., remain the same. So I'm not saying that you take away agencies that protect a woman's rights or a minor's rights or whoever. All I'm saying is that once you move to an economic model that incentivizes responsibility, then you will see more and more people getting responsible, and then you will see more and more people getting aware of the social cost of their actions. That is when you have democratized social change that is ground up, versus a capitalism or communism model which is actually top down.
Excellent answer. And I think the questioner must have. Okay, the question is Alice. Alice, who asked the question. I think she must have gotten an answer. Now, another thing which point raised is the last thing is that any economic model, I've already asked it before, any economic model cannot succeed nowadays without a country or a government supporting it. It cannot succeed. And also there is a bigger ecosystem, which is, I call it the ecosystem of corruption, international corruption, which is thriving on agencies like United Nations and all these organizations, which is thriving on them because they are the ones who do it. So there is another view which is funded by the people like George Soros, is a one world view. And one world view is a very dangerous view where people are trying to create a global government, which has never worked. The concept of Samrat is nothing but local global government, because people locally have different mindsets, different cultures, and the variety in the world is not homogeneous. So in for to that regard, they are trying to create a homogeneous cultures, which is not possible. And sometimes they use consumption as a method of creating a global culture. Like if you go to United States, in US, you have been there many times, but here every 100 miles you see a Walmart or a Target or any other these stores, and there is no fun. People get bored of these stores. Like, but when I come to India, where even 50 kilometers I enjoy a new cutting chai or anything else, just 50 kilometers. And so it's a different level of life fulfillment you get over there. In the US you don't get, so therefore most of the Americans will skip these big stores and go to a small coffee shop which is right on the corner. So globalism versus capitalism versus communism versus Marxism and dharmikism. How do you put it?
Well, you see, here is the thing, right? This whole view of one world or whatever comes out of, in my view, it comes out of assumptions that are fundamentally wrong. Now, think, forget about one world. Let's look at one nation. Doesn't matter which nation you want to look at. Let's look at a nation like East Timor, which is a relatively new nation, which is a very small nation. Right? If you're in America, think about a US context. If you're in India, think about an India context. If you're in Ghana, think about a Ghanaian context. Right? Wherever you are, reality is that everybody needs an identity. And that identity need not be only a national identity. Right? As human beings, we are fundamentally, by our very intrinsic nature, very tribal. Right? Though we should not be, perhaps that's a debatable question, but we tend to look for groups that we associate as our own. Therefore, we say, oh, you're from the same university as me. Right? It doesn't change you, it doesn't change me. But we have some glue that we stick on. It could be, let's say, on caste lines. It could be on, it could be on economic level lines, that you and I are members of the same club, let's say. Right? It could be on interest lines. Oh, you are a triathlete, I'm also a triathlete. Chalo, let's hang out together. So human beings tend, it's very important for people to feel special, for people to feel unique. The way they feel unique is through attributes that they define themselves at, and seeking others that display similar attributes. Right? Now, this whole idea of an attribute-free society is not possible amongst humans. Unless somebody puts a chip in our mind, and for all you know, these guys will, unless somebody puts a chip in our mind, we will not become machines, we will not become robots. So that's, I don't think within a foreseeable future, this whole idea of one world is achievable. Now, I can see why it is an attraction for some people to make it achievable, because it opens up A, unthought levels of markets, B, extremely cheap, extremely mobile labor, C, raw materials that you have unhindered access to. Right. So from, for people who are trying to profit out of it, it is a very interesting business for them to be in, but it is not, there's a huge human cost and social cost to which you can see is being paid. I do strongly believe that human beings have the innate ability to see the truth and to fight for it. And we see a lot of protests happening in different parts of the world to resist a movement like this. Now, coming back to the simpler question, can an economic or any other model prosper without a country pushing for it? Perhaps yes, perhaps no. You see, nobody's had to push for Bollywood. Nobody's had to push for yoga. Water finds its own level. Free markets create opportunities for products, for ideas to achieve the potential that they have. Now, having said that, you can still see, what Prime Minister Modi is doing with Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? What he's doing with Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, what he's doing in terms of going back to rural, what he's doing with indigenous production. All these are very strong indicators that, you see, India is coming of age, right? I mean, as a civilization, we might be thousands of years old, but as a nation, we are only 70 years old. So we're kind of in our teenage years right now. We're trying to figure out what we are about ourselves, right? We've just started developing a few muscles that we never had in the past. Economically, we're realizing playing to our strengths, and you can see the current government exploring a few facets of dharmikism without the umbrella of dharmikism itself. So I think it has to be a gradual change. I mean, if you have to turn around the ship, you can't spin it around 180 degrees. It's not a skateboard. India is not a skateboard. India is bigger than the Titanic. So it will take time for us to shift, but I can see some very visible signs of that already.
Thank you so much, Anuragji. Our time is up. So thank you so much for coming on the show and such an enlightening topic. A lot of people have a lot of questions, but we'll hold them on. If there'll be YouTube video launched in couple of days, you can comment over there and we can continue on the same topic on the next session with Anuragji. Thank you so much, Anuragji, and always a pleasure to have you.
Same here, Aditya ji. Namaskar.